Welcome back, everyone. Ready to dive into another topic today.
Always ready. What are we exploring today?
Well, today we're tackling something that's kind of everywhere. At work, personal lives, even pops up in our inboxes sometimes.
Oh, let me guess. Gotta be about feedback, right?
Yep. Again, constructive criticism.
Yeah.
It's amazing how much discussion this one topic sparks.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And let's be real, sometimes it's not exactly the most welcome discussion either.
Definitely. I mean, who actually enjoys hearing they could have done something better?
Right. Not many folks I know.
That's actually why I'm so intrigued by this Wondermind article you included, the one about how our brains react to criticism.
Ah, yeah, that one's super interesting. Wondermind basically points out that getting criticized can trigger these, primal feelings of rejection.
Almost like we're being pushed out of the group or something.
Exactly. And it makes sense, Our brains are wired for connection, so any feedback that even hints at disapproval can set off those alarm bells.
So it's not just me being sensitive then, it's actually a biological thing.
To some extent, yeah. But here's where it gets even more interesting. The Muse, another source we have, offers this 6-step process for handling criticism.
6 steps. Okay, you've got my attention. What's the first one?
Well, it starts with something that seems almost impossible in the moment. Stop your first reaction.
Wait, hold on. So when someone's giving me feedback and I immediately want to defend myself.
Yeah, exactly. You got to give yourself a split second to choose calmness over that urge to either fight back or shut down completely.
Easier said than done, right?
Okay.
Especially when you feel like the criticism is totally off base.
Oh, absolutely. But remember what that Wondermind article said about that whole rejection response. Taking that pause helps you step back from that primal fear and engage with the feedback from a more, rational place.
Okay, deep breaths. Trying to stay calm. What's next on this roadmap?
So, the Muse then suggests remembering the benefits of feedback. It's not about tearing you down. It's about helping you improve, grow, and, ultimately meet those expectations, whether it's at work, in a relationship, or even just your own goals.
It's like shifting your perspective from this is an attack to this is an opportunity.
Exactly. And that mental shift can honestly make all the difference in how you actually receive the information.
Gotcha. All right, I'm calmer, focusing on the potential benefits. What's the next step?
Now it's about actively listening to understand, not to interrupt or plan your rebuttal in your head.
Oh, man. I'm so guilty of that. It's so easy to get caught up in your own head and miss the actual message.
It happens, but by really listening, you might discover the feedback isn't as bad as you initially thought.
Okay, I'm listening, trying to really absorb what's being said. But what if, even after all that, I still totally disagree with the feedback?
That's where the next step comes in, and this one might surprise you. Say thank you.
Wait, thank you. Even if I think the criticism is totally wrong?
It might feel weird, but remember what Lead Today said about separating your identity from the feedback. Saying thank you isn't about agreeing with everything, it's acknowledging the effort they put in.
So it's more about acknowledging their intention to help, even if, I don't love what they're saying.
Exactly. And Hersing University also emphasized the importance of showing you're open to advice, even if you don't fully agree.
It's like saying, I hear you, I appreciate the time, and now let's talk about this.
Exactly. And that leads perfectly into the next step, asking clarifying questions. Not to argue or defend yourself, but to really get to the heart of the issue.
So not like, why are you picking on me? But more like, can you give me an example?
Yes. Lead Today actually recommends asking for specific examples to really illustrate the feedback. If the person giving the feedback can't offer specifics, well, it might be a sign the feedback isn't as solid as they think.
That's a good point. I'm seeing how each of these steps builds on the last one, creating a much more open approach to receiving feedback.
It's all about shifting out of that fight or flight mode and into a more receptive, learning mindset.
So we've got stopping that initial reaction, remembering the benefits, listening to understand, saying thanks, and then asking those clarifying questions. What's the final step?
The Muse recommends, especially for those bigger, more complex issues, requesting time to follow up. Shows you're taking the feedback seriously and need some space to process before responding.
Makes sense. Prevents you from saying something you'll regret in the heat of the moment.
It's all about being intentional in how you handle feedback, not just reacting on impulse.
This is really resonating with me. It's like a whole new framework for how I think about receiving criticism. But I am curious about the other side of the coin. Giving constructive criticism. How do you do that well?
Ah, yes. Giving feedback is just as tricky, if not more so.
Yeah.
And luckily, Asana's got some fantastic guidance on this. They have this great article outlining some do's and don'ts for giving constructive criticism.
Okay, I'm ready for Asana's wisdom. What's their first do?
They start simple, but powerful. Use I statements. Keep it less personal and more about your own perspective.
So instead of saying you did this wrong, it's more like, I felt this way when this happened.
Precisely. It shifts the focus from blame to explaining your experience. Makes a big difference in how the feedback is received.
It's subtle, but I can see how it creates a less accusatory, more collaborative tone. What about the don'ts? Any big ones that stand out?
One they really advise against, and it's pretty common advice, is the sandwich method.
The sandwich method. You mean like start and end with praise and put the criticism in the middle? I thought that was supposed to soften the blow.
It is, in theory, but it often ends up feeling insincere and can actually bury the message. People see right through it, and it can make the positive feedback feel less genuine.
It's like hiding the medicine in a spoonful of sugar, but the medicine still tastes bad, right?
Exactly. Best to be direct, genuine, and specific with the feedback.
Ditch the sandwich, got it.
Yeah.
What else does Asana recommend?
They also make a good point about the importance of positive constructive criticism.
Positive and constructive at the same time? How does that even work?
It's about highlighting what impressed you and why. Still offering suggestions, but focusing on those positive aspects.
Instead of good job, it's like, I was impressed with how you handled that tough client. Your calm demeanor really helped.
Exactly. You're acknowledging their strengths and giving specific feedback on what worked well.
Makes sense. It feels much more genuine than forced positivity or empty compliments.
Definitely. Asana also talks about giving feedback in a timely manner, ideally within 7 days of the situation while it's still fresh.
That's for sure. Nothing worse than getting feedback months later when you barely remember what happened.
But, and this is important, they also caution against giving feedback without really thinking it over first.
So take a beat before you react.
Exactly. Ask yourself, is this helpful? Do they need to hear it? Am I ready to help them brainstorm solutions? Those are some of the questions they suggest you ask yourself.
Great advice. It's about being intentional with feedback, not just reacting without thinking it through.
And finally, remember to maintain a friendly tone and body language. You're trying to help, not attack.
Right. It's about framing it as an opportunity for growth, not a judgment.
Well said. And BetterUp added another great point here, suggesting you preface your criticism by saying you care and believe they can do better.
So something like, I'm giving you this feedback because I care about your success and know you're capable of amazing things.
Precisely. Sets a more supportive tone right from the start, shows you're invested in their development.
Really good tip. And it ties back to what Asana said about being specific and actionable with your feedback. Don't just say, this is bad. Explain why and how to improve.
Excellent point. BetterUp emphasized that too. Vague feedback is useless. You need to give people those concrete examples and actionable steps to take.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, both accepting and giving constructive criticism. But does the approach change depending on, the situation or the relationship?
That's a great question. And it actually leads us nicely into our next section. Let's talk about navigating criticism in different contexts, because things can change quite a bit depending on where you are.
All right, I'm all ears.
One place that really highlights this is academia. Those Reddit Ask Academia threads you shared were full of insights.
Oh, yeah. It's a whole other world when it comes to criticism. I still remember all the red ink on my papers in college.
It's definitely a different environment, but what's interesting is those threads suggest professors use a lot of feedback because they care. They see potential.
So all that red ink wasn't meant to crush my soul. It's like a sign they believed in me.
Kind of. It means they're investing their time, helping you improve. It's a sign they think your work is worth critiquing,
Wow, I never thought of it that way. Really changes how I view that whole experience.
It goes back to separating your identity from the feedback. It's about the work, not you.
That's helpful. Takes the sting out of it.
And it shows how different contexts have different norms for feedback. BetterUp also points out there are different types of constructive criticism, which adds another layer to this.
Different types. Okay, now I'm really curious. Tell me more.
Well, they mentioned behavioral criticism, which focuses on actions, like timeliness or communication style.
So instead of you're always late, it's more like, I've noticed you've been late to several meetings. Anything I can do to help?
Exactly. Addressing the behavior, not attacking the person. Then there's skill-based criticism, targets areas like presentations or technical skills.
So if someone struggles with public speaking, I might give feedback on their pacing or eye contact, things like that.
Exactly. It's helping them develop specific skills to improve.
This is super helpful. I can see how understanding these different types can help me tailor my feedback.
It's like choosing the right tool for the job. They also mention intent-focused criticism, which can be a bit trickier. It's about acknowledging good intentions, but clarifying how the impact could be better.
Okay, how do you do that without sounding like you're accusing them?
It's all about empathy. Sometimes actions don't match intentions. You might say, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but I've noticed your interruptions during meetings make it hard for others to share their ideas.
Ah, so you're recognizing their positive intent, but also pointing out the unintended consequences.
Yep. And it opens up the conversation about improving communication.
This is fascinating. Constructive criticism is way more complex than I realized.
It really is. It's not one size fits all. BetterUp also talks about developmental feedback, focuses on long-term growth aligned with goals.
So if someone wants to be a leader, I might give them feedback on delegating or inspiring others.
Perfect example, helping them develop the skills to reach their potential.
I like that. It's about supporting their journey, not just pointing out flaws.
And lastly, they mention collaborative feedback. It's a dialogue, not a one-sided lecture.
I love that. Turns criticism into a brainstorming session where everyone feels heard.
Exactly. Fosters partnership and shared responsibility for growth.
Okay, so we've explored receiving criticism gracefully, giving it effectively, and how things change in different situations. I'm feeling a lot more prepared for this whole feedback thing. But how do I apply this to my own life? What does it all mean for me?
That's the key question. And it brings us to our final takeaway, integrating these principles into our daily interactions.
Okay, let's do it. How do we take all this information and make it actionable?
What's cool is these principles apply not just at work, but also in our personal relationships.
Oh, interesting. I usually think of constructive criticism as a work thing, but yeah, it makes sense. It's relevant in our personal lives, too.
Think about it. We constantly give and receive feedback in relationships, whether it's with partners, family, friends. The difference is the stakes can feel higher.
Definitely. It feels way more sensitive in personal relationships.
Absolutely. That's why those principles of tact, empathy, and specific feedback are even more important.
So instead of telling my partner, you never help around the house, I could say, I'm feeling overwhelmed with chores. Would you be willing to do the dishes a few nights a week?
Perfect. You're expressing your needs without blaming and offering a solution.
It feels less like an attack and more like a team effort, like how we talked about framing criticism as a growth opportunity.
Exactly. And remember, listening for understanding. In relationships, it's easy to jump into fix-it mode. But sometimes people just need to feel heard.
Oh, for sure. Sometimes I just need to vent and have my partner listen without trying to fix it.
That's where those active listening skills come in. Repeat what you heard, ask questions, show you get their perspective.
This is great. I can see how these principles can really change how I communicate.
And remember, it's a journey. We're always learning and growing.
Well said. So we've unpacked a ton about constructive criticism today, from psychology to practical tips. Any final thoughts for our listeners?
The key is, constructive criticism, done well, is about growth, not judgment. It's about helping each other become better, personally and professionally.
Love that. And I'd encourage everyone listening to share your own feedback experiences and tips. Keep this conversation going.
Great idea. We can all learn from each other.
Thanks for joining me on this deep dive. Until next time, keep those feedback loops open and keep learning.
It feels like we've only just scratched the surface here, though, right?
I know. There's just so much more to uncover when it comes to feedback.
Absolutely. And it's a topic that's always evolving, especially as the workplace and, well, the world changes.
So true. What worked even a few years ago might not be as effective now.
Exactly. Like all this talk about radical candor and being brutally honest. Not sure I'm on board with all that.
Me neither. It's interesting how these trends kind of come and go.
Definitely. Ultimately, you got to find what works best for you and how you give and receive feedback.
Which is what I appreciate so much about all these different perspectives we've talked about today. It's not about following some rigid set of rules. It's more about understanding the principles.
Exactly. And then adapting them to your own style, the situation, all that.
Like learning a new language, right? You get the grammar and vocabulary, then you can express yourself in your own way.
I like that. A perfect analogy.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into constructive criticism, any final nuggets of wisdom for our listeners?
I think the biggest thing to remember is that feedback, no matter which side you're on, it's ultimately about connection. It's about being there for each other.
Supporting each other's growth and building stronger relationships.
Perfectly said.
And for everyone listening, please keep exploring this topic. Read more, talk to people, try different things out. The more you understand about constructive criticism, the more powerful it becomes as a tool for positive change.
Couldn't agree more.
Thanks for joining me on this deep dive. Until next time, keep those feedback loops open and keep learning.